Hello everybody, this is Jay Davis, the Gaming Gaijin, coming to you with a video response to Sinister Moon's YouTube Gaming Community Discussion Episode 2, Emulation. So yeah, he wants to throw on some discussion about emulation, and since I was one of the big commenters on his previous video about using MAME, I figured I should put a response to this. So, here it is. The only real complaint I had about Sinister Moon's MAME video is that he didn't at all mention that emulation isn't entirely legal. Now I know nobody's really going to get arrested for downloading some ROMs or get sued for downloading ROMs like you could for downloading music or movies, but being legal and being illegal but you're going to get away with it, not really the same thing. And some people do care. Some people have, super strict morals and don't feel like breaking the law at all. Some people have jobs where they have to have government security clearance, which they can pretty easily lose even by just like getting traffic tickets, and really can't afford to do anything even slightly illegal. As if there were degrees of illegal. It's either legal or it's not legal. It's not semi-legal or quasi-legal. It's legal or it's illegal. It's the law. But for most of us, yeah, it's not that big of a deal that it's illegal because there's no real negative repercussions. But I don't know, I just feel like you do need to put that sort of asterisk. This is not exactly legal. That sort of warning statement on there, so people are aware. It's like cigarettes. People who smoke cigarettes, they don't really, most of the time, care that it's going to kill them. But they should still have the little warning sticker on the packet that says, "This is going to give you cancer and you're going to die." Good to know. Ah, delicious cancer. Especially when you're bringing up a discussion about emulation, that's probably going to be aimed at people who aren't entirely familiar with it. Which that MAME video pretty much came across as, "Hey guys, there's this thing called emulation where you can play games for free." Ding! And didn't have any sort of disclaimer on it. So that was really my only real problem with the video. As for emulation itself, there are two sort of extremist views that a lot of people have, and which, being extremist views, I tend not to exactly agree with. There are people who demonize emulation. They're like, "Emulation is the devil. If you emulate your video games and download your ROMs, you're going to hell. You made a deal with the devil. You shouldn't do that. Ever." And then there are people who make it out as like the best thing ever that you can do this. They're like, "Hey man, you heard about emulators? You can play video games on your computer from like the Nintendo and the Sega, and you don't have to pay for them at all, man. It's great. Why would you pay for old video games? Just play them for free, man. It's perfect. Man." But me, I guess I'm somewhere in between those. I've been using emulators for years and years, back during the days of Nesticle and Genesis and No Cache Game Boy. But in general, I'm more the sort of person who likes to not only play games, but collect them. I've never sold a game to a store, traded it in for store credit. I haven't rented a game since I was old enough to buy games myself. I'm that sort of person. I'd rather actually have a copy of the game to keep forever, and it's mine. And I can play it whenever I want on the actual system. Because that's where it's at. But emulation has its place for people like me. It's a nice supplement, in addition to the actual proper collection. For example, Famicom Disk System, an add-on that I don't yet have, but intend to buy within the next year or so. There's a game for the Famicom Disk System called Otaki. It's a little obscure. It's kind of a horizontal shmup with musical elements that... It kind of was the inspiration for Rez, if that says anything. It was made by the same guy who eventually made Electroplankton. Otaki isn't the most common or cheapest game for the Famicom Disk System. I think the last time I saw it for sale online, it was about $35 or $40. That's a little more than I would pay on just a whim to just go, oh, what's this game? Oh, I'll buy that. But after playing Otaki on an emulator, it's now absolutely on my must-buy list of games for the Famicom Disk System, once I get a Famicom Disk System. So what I'm saying is, even for people like me who like to collect games, emulation can be good for, trying a game before you buy it. And of course, emulation is also good for those games that most of us are never going to own a legitimate copy of. I don't know about you, but I don't exactly have the money laying around to buy a legitimate copy of Nintendo World Championship. Now, I could pay $50 for a production cart, but that's not really the same either. But for people like us, emulation's never going to replace playing the actual cartridge on the actual system. Nor should it. Now, the subject gets a bit muckier when you're talking about arcade emulation as opposed to console emulation. Because, as Sinister Moon was quick to point out, most of us don't have the money or space to fill rooms in our house with arcade cabinets. Although, that's not necessarily what you would have to do to own legitimate copies of arcade games. People build things called super guns that are essentially an interface between the JAMA connection on the arcade board for a TV, essentially making like a home console for arcade games that will turn the arcade board into a giant cartridge. But even then, arcade boards aren't exactly cheap for a lot of games. But if you've got the money and you're willing to do that, certainly more power to you. You're awesome. For a lot of us, emulation and collection discs are about as close as we're going to get. Which I guess brings me back around to my other, less prominent problem with Sinister Moon's MAME video, which is that I don't really see emulation as a replacement for the arcade collection discs either. Sure, you're not playing it on the original hardware, you're playing it on an emulator on a console instead of an emulator on a computer, but it's still nice to have an actual physical and legal copy for one's collection of a game. And a lot of these arcade collections, they're like, oh, here's 16 games, and after a month or two of the thing being out, the thing's $15. If you're paying about $1 a game, you don't really have any room to complain about anything about it. So yeah, a lot of the collection discs don't have online play, but the original games didn't have online play. So, and I'll certainly agree that online downloadable services like the Virtual Console, Xbox Live Arcade, Microsoft Game Room, and PlayStation Network can be a bit overpriced for some of these pretty much straight arcade ports. But I mean, some of the games, if they're good enough games and they do things like put in remixed music or put in unlockable artwork, and definitely if they include online play, which most of them do on the downloadable services, not the Virtual Console obviously, but on Xbox Live, Arcade, and PlayStation Network, then $5 is relatively reasonable. Of course, again, that comes down to the individual game. Game Room, the recent thing, I do think that's just pretty much overpriced. There's not even net play on any of them, and they're all like yeah, Yar's Revenge, Adventure. I could see paying $3 for those. I think it's $3, isn't it? I could see paying $3 for those if it was like the actual cartridge. But for an emulated copy that doesn't have any sort of extra functionality, that's not really worth it. Oh, before I forget, other things emulators are good for. I will agree emulators are good for net play on games that you can't otherwise get net play on. There's nothing more fun than running through Kirby Superstar with a friend who lives like 5 states away. And as I think other people have pointed out, translations. It's nice that I have this copy of Tenchi Muyo Gamehen for the Super Famicom in the box with the manual, but I can't really play it because it's a tactical RPG in Japanese, and I don't know that much Japanese yet. but I could play it on an emulator with a patch. And that's not even really going into the discussion of more significant ROM hacks that take old games and basically make new games out of them, which can be a lot of fun too. So if I had to distill this down into just a few bullet points on my opinions of emulation. 1, people need to be aware that it's not entirely a legal thing to do if they're going to get into it, just for their own sakes. 2, even for people like me who are more serious collectors and would rather have the physical games, emulation has its purposes. And 3, emulation is no substitute for the real deal. So, until next time, keep gaming.